Hello everyone, I'm Pia Renada. This is Campaign Convos and ito yung first episode ng Campaign Convos in the month of March. And we know that March is Women's Month, so we thought to begin the month with this topic, no? Assessing the candidacies of two candidates who are women, si Vice President Leni Robredo and also Davao City Mayor Sara Duterte. And of course, we know that these two women are the sole women in their respective races. For VP Leni, siya lang ang nag-iisang babae in a race that includes 10 candidates, right? And sa VP race naman, out of the 9, only Sara Duterte is a woman. So, and if we even go to the senatorial race, napaka-minority ng mga kababaihan because only 7 out of 64 senatorial candidates are women. So we think it's very timely and important to discuss, right? Like how women politicians are perceived by voters and whether or not this identity of being a woman shapes their candidacies. And so with me to talk about this are two reporters covering these two candidates. So magpapakilala tayo ngayon.
Okay. Hi guys, I'm Mara Cepeda. I cover the campaign of VP Leni Robredo and her running mate Senator Kiko Pangilinan.
Hi, I'm Bea Cupin. I cover Sara Duterte and her vice presidential candidacy.
Okay, so I'm gonna moderate this discussion. Pero sinabi mo nga kay Bea kanina, no? Parang funny thing is we actually all like kind of covered these candidates because in 2019, kinover ko si Sara Duterte when I covered the HNP Hupo ng Pababago Slate. And then si Bea covered Leni Robredo when she ran for vice president in 2016. So siguro my first question to our two reporters here, yung pagiging babae ba ng ni Leni Robredo and Sara Duterte, how do you think this has been influencing or affecting their candidacies?
For Leni, it pretty much dictates a lot of how her campaign is being run, precisely because the past 6 years, a lot of the disinformation networks targeting her, in a way, I think kumaga parang they were feeding on the negative connotations of VP Leni as a woman. The focus group discussions of the campaign team show that the major perceptions of those who do not want to vote for VP Leni for president is that one, she's a woman, so she's a weak leader, and that is related then to the other main criticism that kuda lang siya ng kuda, wala naman siyang nagawa. So the typical thing that us women have to deal with na dami-dami yun namang sinasabi pero wala namang laman. And it's something that I'm sure a lot of women here can relate to. And I think that's also why she, even if she has a very good track record, it delivers, may resibo nga, ika nga, uh, hindi pa rin niya nakaka-capture yung imagination ng Filipino voter precisely because she has itong mga very gendered narratives against VP Leni. It's being perpetuated by the disinformation networks against her online. And so I have been noticing since she declared her candidacy that there is an effort on the part of the campaign team to portray VP Leni as a strong female leader. And she has been doing this many, many times already in many interviews and many debates. Pero in terms of visuals, nagawa din nila yan. So whenever she would have her regular briefings with the military or the police, talagang the team would really go out of their way na magpadala talaga ng mga photos kahit mag-11 o'clock na ng gabi. And very deliberate yung mga angulo na VP Leni Robredo, parang ala commander-in-chief, na sinasaluduhan siya ng mga uniformed officers, kausap siya ng mga general. And these are all aimed to help counter that narrative that she's weak.
Yung kay Sara naman, I think, and I shared this observation with some of the other reporters earlier today, no, na parang she doesn't really like being a woman isn't front and center of her campaign. Not to say na parang in denial siya or hindi niya, pero parang hindi siya overt na message na I am a mother because she is, I am a woman, pero it's not the center narrative. And to me, part of that maybe is also because her image is that of a very tough person, not even a tough woman, parang tough person. Parang kung maalala nyo, di ba, parang ginamit ko rin tong lead on the profile of Sara na her first introduction to the national scene was nung nanuntok siya ng what you call this, ng sheriff sa Davao City. So parang in a way, I guess that set the tone for how people perceive Sara Duterte. And also, parang, and the numbers support this, di ba na? Um, most of those who approve of President Duterte also tend to lean towards voting for Sara Duterte. So, in my head, in a lot of ways, people perceive her as a Duterte first, a woman second, or parang hindi na nga important yun. Parang at the end of the day, she is the daughter of Rodrigo Duterte, and that bears with it so much weight, both good and bad siguro, depending on who the voter is. And I think Mara has some like insights also on the perception of the
Yes.
female leaders
Yeah,
in the
go ahead.
Philippines.
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to political science professor Jean Encinas Franco, and in the podcast version of this, share namin sa inyo yung interview namin. And then I asked her kasi bakit ba iba yung perception ng tao sa pagkababae ni Leni Robredo at ni Sara Duterte. And she explained it very well. Tayo kasing mga Pilipino, very masculine pa rin sadly yung tingin natin sa kung ano yung perception natin as a people, because I don't share this perception
Neither do
honestly.
I.
And I don't think Pia does either, pero in general ang mga Pilipino ang tingin nila masculine ang malakas, maskulado, brusko, yun ang malakas para sa Pilipino, at yun yung nagre-reflect ngayon sa mga survey, sa mga botante. Si Sara Duterte kasi 'di ba, apart from knowing her as the daughter of the president na very foul-mouthed, tough talking, as Bea said, I know Sara Duterte as that mayor from Davao who punched a sheriff, right? And went viral for that. So ang tingin talaga sa kanya ng tao, talagang tough, parang tough ala Kalye Canto type of tough. Very different from the quiet strength of VP Leni, very feminine. And it's very sad to say people tuloy consider this as weakness, even if yung mga nanay natin sobrang lakas sa pag-support sa atin in all aspects of our life,
Mm.
emotionally, 'di ba,
Yeah.
mentally, pero hindi yun nare-relate in terms of leadership qualities ng mga voters as compare. And then Professor Franco also said that kaya rin iba yung tingin ng tao, or that's why the likes of Gloria Macapagal Arroyo and the late Miriam Defensor Santiago didn't have to deal with this kind of weakness criticism, is because they're very feisty, mataray, matapang, um, and they're known to be like that. Parang perception is parang they'll bite, right?
Mm.
Susungitan ka
Parang
talaga nila.
firebrand ka
And it's
dapat.
Yes, very different from VP Lenny. Meron siyang mga magagandang soundbite, lalo na if it's related to Marcos Jr., for example. Pero
Yeah.
hindi pa rin siya yung tipong tatakpan niya yung tenga niya during a Senate hearing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or yung
Mm.
maninigaw siya
Yeah.
ng staff. Hindi kasi siya ganon. And unfortunately, um, people tuloy see her as weak or too soft or too feminine, which is, I think is not very accurate at all.
Pero
Mm.
parang greater ano rin siya, no? Sorry. Pero
No, no,
parang it's
go.
it's a greater like the double standard in Philippine
Mm.
society in general, where one type of femininity is inferior to another. Parang it's
Yeah.
so strange.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I'm just bringing this up because like I hear a lot of people say, na, oh, parang we're such a matriarchal society, like we value our women, we see mothers as like the strong people in the family. Pero parang the like just based on yung reading on why Leni Robredo, the vice president, is perceived that way. Parang I can't help but think na we see them as strong, but we see women and mothers as strong, but only hanggang dito ka lang strong? Or I don't know, like, ganun ba yun?
Interesting, right? Kasi one of the people who espoused those wrong beliefs is President Duterte himself. And ito yung
Yeah.
ambag ko sa conversation na to kasi I cover President Duterte. But may time talaga, di ba? May sinabi pa siya na a woman cannot be president because hindi raw niya kaya yung dumi ng politics. And, a lot of people read this as kind of a warning or maybe a factor in why at first Duterte didn't want his daughter Sara to run. Kasi parang ayaw niya na ma-expose siya masyado sa dirt on the level of national politics that the president naturally faces. So parang, syempre, yung subtext dyan is, dahil babae ka, hindi ka dapat maging presidente. And that goes for you, Sarah. You may be a strong woman, but you're my daughter. I want to protect you. So again, this parang kind of macho cult na I have to protect the women in the family, even if, parang kind of downplaying their competence and saying that
Mm.
hindi kaya sumabak sa dumi or play politics ang mga babae. And obviously this is wrong and erroneous, but it does, like it holds sway with a lot of voters, maybe not even
Yeah.
consciously, but sadly, di ba, nandun siya. Kasi even me, when I ask
Mm.
some male colleagues or voters na parang, banayan niyo si Leni Robredo, kasi babae, parang, bakit ganon? Why do we still hold on to this? Knowing that, di ba, we've had two female presidents in our history,
Yes.
di ba? Unlike a lot of countries na wala pa silang female president ever. Tayo meron na eh. So bakit ganito? Ba't tayo nagkakaganito?
Tingin ko ingrained kasi yan sa atin growing up. I mean, kahit in day-to-day conversations, may mga babae pa rin ngayon na 'pag may banggaan, kahit babae magsabi, "Ay, kasi babae yung driver." And you say it so casually, but then you realize internalize na yung misogyny mo kasi doon ka pinalaki. So I think ang hirap labanan nito kasi pagpapalaki 'to sa'yo hindi lang nung magulang mo directly, but the kind of society that you live in. In terms of double standards, for example, in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, halimbawa, for a couple of days already, nagva-viral yung sagot ni VP Leni when she was asked, I think DZRH interview ba ito, about what she would do regarding the escalating tensions between Ukraine and Russia. And at the time, hindi pa nag invade ang Russia. It's really just parang tensions pa lang, and her answer really was more focused on, okay, we have to protect the rights, so protect the Filipinos who are currently in Ukraine. And number two, she then praised Ukraine for using its relationships, its alliances with other nations to stand up to a superpower like Russia. And then a couple of weeks later, Russia did invade Ukraine. Pero ang spin ng mga troll ay hindi marunong si Leni Robredo mag-handle ng war. Kasi tinan mo, ito yung sagot niya, yung Russia nasa Ukraine na. So it's really, 'di ba, taken out of context, different time
Mm.
frame. But when it was Ferdinand Marcos Jr. who refused to take a stand when Russia was already invading Ukraine, nobody had a problem with it. Why? Because a man said it. If Leni had said it, people will be like, mahina ka, hindi ka marunong makipaglaban. But because Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is a man, nobody had a problem with him staying out of that
Right.
international issue. Ba? Very, very,
But
I scratch my head about it.
parang ano nga siya, it's little things that build up to,
Mm.
it's like little microaggressions na parang, but also to add lang pala to Sara Duterte, like
Mm.
even before, kahit na si isang Sara Duterte siya ha, kahit na, she carries with her the Duterte brand na talagang tough, masculine, right? Like, parang sometimes politically incorrect, pero papanigan pa rin ng tao. Parang she has spoken before. Parang it's an old, very old Rappler profile. I think sila Patricia Evangelista shot it a year or so or months after the punching incident nga in Davao City. And she did, I think if I recall correctly, she did talk about yung pagmamaliit sa kanya na babae ka lang, bata ka pa. So may ganun din naman, kahit si Sara Duterte, hindi rin siya, kumbaga, exempt sa internalized misogyny na yan, na both overt and subtle. But I guess years down the line, na-refine na rin siguro yung image niya. Like, syempre, nung time na yun, she was, 30, in her early 30s. Oh my God, kaedad lang natin halos ngayon. She was in her early 30s. Marami na siyang pinagdaanan, di ba? Like Pia said, like, she's also campaigned in 2019 for a national slate. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's so strange. It's strange to me talaga how a country that parang boasts of being so progressive when it comes to women is actually kind of very backwards. Lalo na sa representation in not just elected posts in government, but like even in the judiciary. Di ba kung makita mo yung picture ng Supreme Court, parang it's mostly men, obviously. So, yeah.
I remember rin, nung time na sinabi nga ni Duterte na a woman can be president, actually, minessage ko si Sara Duterte about it before. And she even replied by saying that she doesn't agree with her father, but she respects his views daw. Parang hindi niya na lang ika-counter or hindi na
Yeah.
lang niya, I mean, parang he said what he said. I don't agree,
Yeah.
but he said what he said. So parang there is really a kind of like a little bit of a criticism there, but
Yeah.
still kind of soft, right? Like, I mean, if you
Yeah.
were a woman, maybe if you weren't the daughter of the person who said that, you would really go all out and
Yeah.
say that's misogyny, that's wrong, that's just on so many levels. But yeah, she doesn't really play the woman card so up front and center. And maybe
Uh-uh.
I think, is it working for her? Do you think, or is something else working for her?
I mean, if the numbers are an indication, it's super working for her. Pero hindi mo rin kasi maano, hindi siya yung ma-isolate na yun lang. Kasi
Mm,
syempre, isa siyang Duterte. Paulit-ulit ako, pero isa siyang Duterte. Right? May previous studies na parang kumbaga sa top 3 endorsers for 2022, like she's in the top 3. Like she's that lakas as a brand of her own. Plus, you have the Rodrigo Duterte brand. So, isa rin yun. Pero parang just to add also to the femininity of Sara, or the kind of woman that Sara Duterte is, parang, I don't think this is deliberate. I think this is also a matter of, ganun lang talaga yung personality niya. Kunwari, yung ano, mahalin natin ang Pilipinas caravan ride. Di ba sobrang macho, tough nung images of
Yeah.
her in her bike
right,
initially. Pero
Mm.
eventually, she moved to a vehicle, but not just any vehicle. It was an armored vehicle. Like, di ba parang, it was almost comical to look at, but like, parang, kung kahit ako, napaisipin ako, parang estig-tig na ng image, di ba na, of
Yeah.
Sara Duterte, like, going
true.
around the country in an armored vehicle of all things. Like, it was both the most random thing, and both a very expected thing for one Sara Duterte na, okay,
Right.
armored vehicle. Hindi lang basta-bastang sasakyan yung bitbit mo habang umiikot ka ng Pilipinas.
And let's not forget, isa sa mga first policy pronouncements niya as a vice presidential candidate is yung mandatory military service. So talagang parang military, like let's go, armed
Yeah.
confrontation, etc. And I also remember, no, covering her when she goes around with President Duterte, she shows her tattoos. As in, she wants to project an image talaga na, I mean, tattoos, right? Like there's a cultural connotation around women with tattoos, like it or not, meron talaga. And parang the fact that she wears them with pride, doesn't hide them. It also says something about the kind of branding she wants to project, I think.
Mm. Mhm.
Naalala
Nalungkot
ko
ako
rin,
bigla sa nalungkot ako sa discussion about how sexist the Philippines can be, how misogynistic it can
Mm.
be.
Pero may
pero
naisip ko
parang,
for VP Len.
go
Yeah.
ahead.
Go ahead, go ahead. Go, Pia.
Hindi, yung naisip ko lang parang this whole connotation between military, like, action, commander-in-chief, kaya ba babae? I remember nung 2016 debates, didn't Rodrigo Duterte ask Grace Poe, the only female candidate then for president, kung anong gagawin mo if ma-invade ng China yung West Philippine Sea? And didn't Grace Poe receive so much flack for saying, babangon ako? Naalala niyo yun? So parang, I think it was a very calculated move on Duterte's part
Yeah.
back then to kind of
Yeah.
Mm.
catch Grace Poe off guard with a question about military action, decisiveness. Kasi
Yeah.
nga, maybe riding on this like thinking that women can't be decisive or can't command during a crisis or a war situation. But you were
But
saying,
speaking
Myra.
about
Mm.
sorry, go ahead. Ikaw muna, Mara.
No, sa akin kasi parang I don't think VP Lenny should change her image either because that would hurt her even more kasi
Yeah,
hindi siya yun eh, hindi siya
Correct.
macho
yes.
type, 'di ba? Parang lalo lang she's just going to go off brand and off message if she tries to project something that she isn't. And so one of her usual messages ngayon pagka may interviews is that an iron fist cannot trump the courage of a mother. And dun yun yung nagshi-shape sa campaign ni Leni Robredo ngayon na siya ay isang nanay, asawa, naging biyuda at lahat nung paghihirap na pinagdaanan niya sa buhay niya, lahat 'yon nalampasan niya. Lahat 'yon nalampasan niya pati yung mga eleksyon na marami sa mga kritiko ang nagsasabi sa kanya na hindi niya kaya. Um, you know, covering her during her sorties, my God, 18 hours talaga siya guys nagtatrabaho kasi 18 hours din ako nagsusulat at nagko-cover sa kanya. Wala rin talaga akong tulog. Pero I mean, covering her on the ground, she's able to project strength as a female leader. But I think what her campaign needs to adjust are her ads. her air war. Because I don't think the strong message about gobyernong tapat, angat buhay lahat is being translated into the messages being aired on her advertisements. A lot of Filipinos do not go to these political rallies, right? They rely on what they
Yeah.
see on TV, what they hear on the radio, what they read on the newspaper. And if you're not able, kung hindi makaka-keep up yung ads ni Leni Robredo dun sa energy at galing niya sa mga speeches niya sa sorties, lalong magkakaproblema. Just some unsolicited advice to
No,
the
and just
campaign
to
team.
add to Lenny's, 'di ba? Parang she absolutely should not deviate from that kasi una sa lahat, siya naman yun eh, parang pipilitin mo na magbago siya. Pero if you recall, back in 2016, one of the biggest zingers she had, na one-liner na, to be fair, until now, parang iconic pa rin yun, di ba? The last man standing is a woman, di ba? Just to highlight the fact that, syempre marami kang pwedeng pagpilian yun, di ba? Kasi parang a lot of the vice presidential candidates in 2016 were also Bicolano. So ang dami mga ganon, pero parang syempre yung pinaka-obvious doon is I'm in a sea of men and I'm the only female candidate here. So I just want to add na in 2016, now with the siguro with the advantage of hindi na ako nadadala ng mga sabi-sabi ng mga tao at like the daily kind of reportage, people were like very harsh towards Grace Poe in 2016. Like the
You're
narrative,
correct.
like
Yeah.
kasi parang if people watching or listening to this later on recall, di ba? The Grace Poe ran for president. But at first, she was in, much like the unity talks leading up to the 2022 polls. Initially, parang she was in talks with, she's not LP, but the LP, the party in power then, parang we're talking to her, trying to convince her. Initially, parang search muna kung sino ba ang magiging standard bearer ng Liberal Party. It was between her or Mar Rojas, and then eventually when Mar Rojas was endorsed na as the presidential candidate, or parang, I forget the exact timeline, basta basically, when the talks faltered that si Mar na talaga yung magiging standard bearer, we tried to convince Grace to run for vice president also. And ito naman, hindi ako sure kung narrative lang ito sa mga hardcore Liberal Party then or hardcore na supporters ng Liberal Party. Pero there was always that narrative na ang selfish mo kasi. Parang ang selfish kasi ni Grace. Bakit siya tumakbo? Ba't di na lang siya nag-slide down to vice president? I mean, not to say they're absolutely wrong na wrong strategy yon to slide down or whatever. Pero parang there are hints of like, sexism right there na parang ano
Yes.
ba naman to? Parang bakit ka hindi nakiisa? Bakit ka hindi nag-cooperate? So parang while I was covering like the whole crazy of 2016 then, but it didn't quite register right away as like medyo misogynistic, medyo may pagka-sexist ata yung undertones ito. Pero parang now, 6 years later, like, wow, people were so harsh. And then parang may pasundot na ano parang okay, I see the undertones of this narrative na you know.
Our co-reporter Ralph Rivas published a very good analysis of the image problem of Leni Robredo at this point of the campaign. And meron ako dong new learning from him eh. Yung konsepto ng glass cliff that only women leaders have to deal with. According to Ralph's article, shout out to Ralph, it's a phenomenon where women are placed in leadership roles when the
Yeah.
risk of failure is highest. And that applies to Grace Poe, that applies to Leni Robredo. And for Robredo in particular, yung tatlong eleksyon na tinakbuhan niya, hindi niya talaga yun pinag-ambisyonan, 'di ba? And people have always doubted her precisely because she was thrust into the political spotlight. And people doubted that she has any skills to become a politician, even because she's always been very low key. She's a very good alternative lawyer, a very good development worker. That is her passion. But people didn't think that, kaya niyang sikmurain yung politika. Pero look, she's running as president now. Obviously, kaya niyang sikmurain yung politika sa isang bansa na lahat yung mga pinakabastos at pinakamasasahol na kasinungalingan at kritisismo ay binato na sa kanya at sa mga anak niya. And I think, this glass cliff concept, I think, you Pia and Bea can relate to this as well kasi when you're in a country like the Philippines, you always have to work twice as hard when you're a woman. Like
Mm-hmm.
even if obviously yung skills wise mas magaling ka, parang pakiramdam ko ba parang there's little room for me for failure because
Mm.
society will judge me more not because of my failure itself, but precisely because a woman made that failure. Um and that's further magnified when you're a woman in a position of power, I believe.
I can
Speaking of
imagine, like, if there are sorry. Go ahead, go ahead.
Hindi, ano lang, parang speaking of strength and being a woman, 'di ba? If you look at yung histories, political histories ni Sara and ni Leni, very different eh. Kasi si Sara, I mean, even if she may project this image of strength, big bikes, tattoos, parang, punching people, her political life has been, I mean, really, big picture, it's been a breeze because she's been in
Oh,
power.
super.
She's the daughter of a very popular
Yeah.
mayor and then president. And then, so parang kind of power came easy to her. Like, she could just lift a finger, call
Yeah.
up some calls, and because she's the daughter of Duterte, gets her way. But, compare mo naman dun sa story ni Leni na from the very
Mm.
start, it was an uphill battle, di ba? Like, nung vice presidential race in 2016, walang may kilala sa kanya, but slowly but
Yeah.
surely, she gained those numbers and
Run pa
won.
lang.
And then, even as a cabinet member ni Duterte, she was eased out. And then, yeah, proving herself constantly, constantly, constantly until itong presidential race na nobody thought she would run because of her numbers, but lo and behold, here she is in second place. So parang for me, diba, yung strength, how do you define strength? Because if you look at these two candidates, right, parang I think one has been very comfortable for much of her life and the other really struggled. So, diba, kayo na lang maging judge kung who
Yeah.
embodies the strength, real strength.
If anything, 2022 will be the first like major test for Sara Duterte, I think.
Yeah,
Kasi
right.
as Pia mentioned, diba, parang when she ran for vice mayor, she ran under her father, as the running mate of her father, with the plan being, tatakbo kang mayor kasi gagraduate na si Duterte at that time, kasi term limit na siya. And then succeeding elections din, basically, parang yung margins, yung una siyang tumakbo, 2,000 lang. Hello?
Sorry, a picture fell.
Oh,
Sorry, go
okay.
ahead.
Live. That's live for you guys. Okay, so parang the first time she ran, parang yung lamang ay 2,000. Ay, hindi lamang, sorry. Yung pinaka-close sa kanya, 2,000 votes. Tapos yung the next time naman, 4,000. So can you imagine how dominant that makes you as a mayoralty aspirant, 'di ba? So technically it'll be her first talaga na parang you have serious contenders, but look at the numbers, right? Like she has a huge advantage as a Duterte going into
Yeah.
her first national election. So ang hirap din i-compare kasi nga sobrang iba yung circumstances din of their
Mm-hmm.
entry into politics and the way they've experienced politics nga. Yung kay Leni, 2013 pa lang, di ba? Parang basically napilitan, hindi man napilitan, pero parang she had no choice but to step up kasi
Yeah.
nagkakagulo sa distrito niya at that time.
Mhm. Tsaka dehado siya doon, ang kalaban niya doon mga Villafuerte, well-entrenched. Interestingly, she was up against the family matriarch, si Nelly Villafuerte, so it was a
Mm.
woman versus woman thing, right? Pero yun nga, that's always been the narrative of the political battles of Leni Robredo. Lagi siyang dehado. But I think time and time again, people will always underestimate her, sometimes even her own supporters. But so far, time and time again, she has proven them wrong. Um, Wala kasi siyang inuurungang laban. I think yun yung very clear, and I think that indicates her strength eh. Kasi despite everything that's been thrown at her, she's still here, she still shows up, she still works her ass off on the campaign sorties. And I don't know how everybody in her campaign team, is able to keep up
Keeps
with
up.
her. Because sometimes there are days where I cannot I cannot even keep up with her sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, if that isn't strength, I don't know. I don't know, guys.
Gusto ko na
There
mag-zoom
was
out din. Go
Go,
ahead, go
go.
ahead.
Hindi, ikaw
No,
muna,
no, no,
go.
go, P. No, kasi I wanted to zoom out lang. Kasi I recall in my very, very brief stint at the house,
Mm.
parang mentally pa lang, trying to point out ilan yung female legislators who do not come from dynasties. Parang sobrang limit,
Mm.
ang liit lang,
Yes,
ang liit
you're
na
right.
pool noon. right? So parang, I
Right.
mean, not to invalidate elected officials who do come from dynasties and who happen to be women. Pero parang, it also gives you a little insight, right? Na parang, were they elected because they're women, or parang despite being a woman kasi nga more than the pitfalls and the misogyny hurled towards you being a woman, but at the end of the day you're a member of a entrenched dynasty. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
who you really are as long as you carry that family name. So I'm just like,
Mhm.
inaalala ko yung kongresong yun, parang bilang lang talaga yung legislator na hindi entrenched political family nang galing.
And
Was
often the
something
ones who are given the posts sa house, very quickly lang, Pia, usually sila yung
Yeah.
mga anak ng mga politiko, or dahil dating speaker si daddy or si
Yeah.
mommy, dating ganito, may position sa house. Sila din yung mga binibigyan in a way, even if they are good leaders in themselves, um mas nagkakaroon ng weight kasi may weight yung pangalan nila, yung apelyido nila.
in this parang realization na napaka-pervasive nga ng subtext na women are weak, do you think something has been lost along the way? Kasi if we recall, like one of the most popular presidents, at least initially in their presidency, diba, was Corazon Aquino, and she was the first female president, and she came right after a dictator, someone na who represented an iron fist, kamao, diba? But she parang came in with like parang democracy icon, and she was a housewife. Wala siyang like political background to speak of, but she won, and there was so much support around her. Talagang Philippines unified around her, and she even had very strong endorsement power after that. Like even
Yeah.
after she was president,
Yeah.
diba? Parang Cory Magic, parang ano she was really kind of even symbolized a certain period in her history, like all by herself. That Times Magazine covers, etc. So parang since we've had such an affinity with a Cory Aquino figure, you would think na baka mawala na sana yung ganong kind of double standards or women leaders, but yun na nga parang bumalik, or I don't know if it's always just been there, like lurking in the background. What do you think happened? Or is this to do something not with her gender, but with, simply the disillusionment with the whole yellow liberal party kind of thing that we're seeing now?
I think halo-halo siya. Pero parang baka rin kasi the fact that we elected back then our first female president, parang it put us in a wrong place of comfort na, oh my God, guys, we have solved misogyny. I think that was also an issue in the US na nung na-elect na si Barack Obama, parang, oh my God, racism solved. Parang that's not the thing, right? Like, parang you have this one person, one politician who you did put into power, pero parang yung systemic na misogyny, yung ingrained na misogyny sa society, parang hindi pa na-address ng buo. So parang, feel ako rin for me, medyo dangerous din sometimes to reduce discussion of like representation of women in politics to, we've already had two female presidents eh. Parang, to add din, parang nga, iba yung circumstance, right? Of like Cory being whisked into power, and then later on GMA being elected into power, right? Parang, I don't know. I'm not quite an expert yet in discussions of like electoral politics and gender politics. Pero parang to me that's what it reads as, na parang we assumed falsely na, oh, we fixed it. We're good. No, we're not. Pero in the greater scheme of things, like kung parang kahit umangat pa yan ng 50-50 yung gender distribution sa, let's say, sa house, pero parang isipin mo rin, oh, most of those are from dynasties though. So like, you know?
Speaking of your two candidates, kasi di ba may lumalabas na Robredo-Sara tandem. And, it's possible that VP Leni could win as president and Sara could win as VP, and in which case we would have like the two top elected posts in the land going to two women. So, do you think, how would these two women work together based on what you know of them?
Naalala niyo yung 2016, may nilabas na picture of them having a
Yeah.
meal
Yes.
in
Yeah.
I think a lot of hopeful souls go back to that picture na, oh, parang pwede sila maging kaibigan. Parang yung narinig ko after and during that time, hindi naman sila super like close talaga. Although marami silang points of intersection, like it was Jessie Robredo, I believe, who was DILG nung nanuntok si Sara
Oh,
nung
okay.
sheriff ata. Alam ko si Jessie Robredo yung sumita kay Sara nung time na yun. And actually that meeting, if I'm not mistaken, was also because of the kaya natin factor.
Mm.
Kasi may presence yung kaya natin sa Davao City. I don't know, but like even the kahit ako iniisip ko ngayon, handa ba yung Pilipinas magkaroon ng babae na president and vice president? Even that's kind of misogynistic, right? Like, why would that even matter? Bakit ko iniisip yun? Pero iniisip ko siya. May
Mhm.
internalized misogyny din ako kahit paano, di ba?
Tingin ko, if magkakaroon tayo ng scenario where Leni Robredo is the president and Sara Duterte is the VP, I've covered Leni Robredo long enough to know that di niya hahayaan na yung ginawa sa kanya ng tatay ni Sara, gagawin niya kay Sara. That's probably the best revenge to Duterte as well, eh. Na para tingnan mo, hindi ko gagawin sa anak mo yung ginawa mo sa akin. And I think that's very, that's also quite telling of Leni Robredo's character. And I hope that, if she does win and Sarah does win, then she will stay true to her word na bibigyan niya ng, hindi niya i-ostracize yung yung vice president niya if ever it won't be Senator Kiko Pangilinan. But of course, we can never really tell eh. Kasi once you're the
Yeah.
president, you can do anything eh. Right?
Yeah.
But I'm trying to remember who told this to me, but I think some of the local officials I've spoken to in Bicol, many of them actually do not are not 100% backing Senator Kiko Pangilinan for VP, even if 100% sure sila kay Leni. They're saying baka mas may chance pa si Sara, not just because she's a Duterte, but because they're saying that the Philippines isn't ready to have a female typical feminine leader, but because Sarah represents a kind of leadership that's close to very macho, then mas magiging palatable yung Lenny Sara for them, which again points to our internalized misogyny kasi dapat they're supposed to be chosen by the people based on the merits of their track records and their ability
Not
to
how
lead, to make
soft.
decisions eh, not because yeah, not because whether they are soft or 'di ba, parang nakaka-disappoint lang pero yun yung realidad eh. And these two women, they've had to deal with that all their lives.
Pero Pia, naalala ko nung 2016, 'di ba? Nung biglang umusbong yung Dobredo, may ganung notion, 'di ba, na parang Leni will temper Rodrigo. Parang ako
Yeah.
naman as someone covering, parang ano to, gumagawa tayo ng Sims na bahay. Parang parang may ganung ding notion na parang ite-temper niya, parang hindi naman babysitter ng president yung vice president. Like, that's not how the executive branch works in the Philippines. But I mean, dun yung, pero strangely enough, in that instance, like her femininity or her brand of being a woman worked for her kasi yung pag-imagine ng mga tao, parang the mother, like Leni Robredo as mother, can temper the bastos, walang pakialam sa consequences image of one Rodrigo Duterte. So, weird din in that way, no?
Yeah, actually, si John Neri, who's a Rappler editorial consultant and columnist here, meron siyang column na parang a lot of Duterte voters in 2016 voted for Robredo for their vice president. So maraming DDS na actually dilawan din in a way.
Yeah.
And yun na nga, because of this, parang putting together different qualities na Duterte tough and then Leni soft kuno or parang malambing, na parang voters really kind of identify with their candidates based on the qualities they embody or like they project. So, yun na nga parang for a woman, like hindi naman necessarily na lahat ng women candidates malambing, pero si Leni talaga, I guess, espouses that kind of soft power. And, it might work to your advantage this time. I mean, who knows, diba? Like, kasi faced with Marcos, right? A male candidate, pero sinabihan din naman siya ni Duterte as a weak leader, spoiled brat pa nga. So parang, in a way, right? That kind of counters like the image of male as a strong candidate all the time. Like there are certain, candidates na just because you're male doesn't mean like you're this toughy. At least Duterte would like us to think so.
Pero kasi yung weak leader criticism ni Duterte kay Marcos, parang it didn't stick naman eh, no?
Yeah,
Parang
mukhang it
not
He
so
didn't
much.
repeat it.
I mean, if Duterte had said Robredo is a weak leader, nako, all of our social media feeds would probably, tingin ko and again, it's gender. It all boils down to gender.
Yeah, and siguro
True.
we can turn also our attention to yung Senate race kasi yun na nga, 7 out of 64, my gosh, that's such a tiny percentage of the whole are women. And if you look nga at the women, yung mga talagang top or yung kilalang names, di ba? They're, like for example, Risa Ontiveros being faced with red tagging,
Yeah.
disinformation online. We have Samira Butok, who is a Muslim
Mm.
woman fighting for like refugees and refugee rights. We have Dr. Mingita Padilla, di ba? A doctor,
Yeah.
a woman, but also a doctor primarily who wants to really parang help with the pandemic response. So, pero like as Bea pointed out, di ba, Lauren Legarda dominating the race also. So, ano
Yeah.
different strengths rin eh.
Yeah. And I guess Lauren also has a different brand to her, 'di ba? Parang
Mm-mm.
environment. And but also like you can't discount the fact that she's been senator before. Like
Mhm.
iba pa rin
Yes.
yung name recall ng
Oo.
isang re-electionist compared to those who are attempting to enter the Senate. Parang, and even Risa, parang people might forget, it was a struggle for her to be elected the first time. Like she,
Yes.
third
And the
time is the
second
try.
time,
Like
yeah.
yeah, like it
Yes.
was it was an uphill climb for her to make it the first time. Tas naalala ko if my memory serves me right, parang she also had to tweak her image several times in every election to see kung, and then finally nung third time kumagat na nga rin yung messaging niya
Mhm.
during the 2016 elections. So
Mhm.
Mm. So parang in the Senate race, it's really a name call thing most of the time.
oh
Unlike what
yeah,
we're seeing in the VP, di ba? Parang minsan a newbie, a relative newbie can make it
yeah,
good if you project certain qualities.
yeah.
So, mm,
Parang weirdly enough, mas madaling gumawa ng sarili mong pangalan.
Yes.
Kahit wala ka pang, kasi parang Duterte in 2016, right? And you have Isko Moreno now who uh, LCE palang galing din kasi LCE to president yung foresee nila na jump. Pero parang yung sa Senate kasi it's hard because it's also a crowded race.
Yes.
Um, parang ang hirap, tsaka ang hirap tumarget ng kalaban kasi ang dami sinong tatargetin mo, yung 1 to 5 yung 'di ba parang mahirap din siya tansyain, kaya rin sa Senate race mas maraming mga old names na pumapasok, either bumabalik or bagong pasok pero familiar name na sila to begin with, so ang laki talaga ng name recall sa Senate race.
Mhm. Mhm.
mm,
Now, interestingly, VP Leni has to deal with, all these gendered criticisms of her. Pero pag tinignan mo naman yung, since we're talking about her Senate slate, dalawa lang din yung babae sa Senate
mm,
slate niya. It's only Senator Laila De Lima and Senator Risa Hontiveros, and both
Yeah.
are re-electionists pa. So I think, if you want to introduce reforms in our political system, then our leaders in power have to make conscious efforts to really put
Yeah.
women at the fore.
mm,
Agree.
Subconscious kasi yung ating misogyny as a people. So when you are in a position of power, tulungan mo yung bayan to subconsciously make it regular for them to see women in positions of
Yeah.
power. I remember when Trudeau first became Canadian Prime Minister, 'di ba? Parang one of the things that people praised him was how gender inclusive yung kanyang cabinet. So
mm,
maybe in the future, when the dynamics of the elections are different, our presidential candidates can have, Senate slates where women are well represented, hindi lang dominated by men. We know, of course, the dynamics are quite complicated, 'di ba? Name recall, sino yung galing sa political dynasty, sino yung may pera, sino yung may ganyan. But we hope that there's going to be a more conscious effort like that. And for our next president, kung babae man siya o lalaki man siya, sana mas maraming babae yung mabigyan ng posisyon sa gabinete. Para yung mga bata na nag-aaral, pwede na silang mangarap na, pwede pala akong maging cabinet official, pwede pala akong maging senador. Kasi napapanood ko sila sa TV, nababasa ko sila sa Rappler, nadidinig ko sila sa radyo. Kasi hanggat hindi na yun consciously ginagawa ng mga leader natin, hindi mababago yun eh, yung pagtingin sa babae na mahina at hindi kayang maging leader.
Tsaka to add lang to what Mara said, no, parang bakit important ba na may babae, may LGBT, may queer, may bakla sa politics natin. Bukod sa yung literal representation inspiring a future generation, no. May mga topics kasi that parang cisgendered men might not think of right away.
Mhm.
Not practically their fault also. Pero part of it also their fault. Pero parang kunwari naalala ko nung KBP forum, presidential candidates forum, di ba? Walang nagtanong tungkol sa women's, may dumaan na company sa labas ng bahay ko. Parang wala nagtanong kunwari sa LGBTQ rights, wala nagtanong ng women's like reproductive health rights, wala nagtanong nun kasi everyone who asked questions were men, right? So that's another thing that's another reason why it's important to to encourage diversity in politics, and by diversity we mean
Yes.
women, queer people, um, and hopefully people who are from dynasties, parang mag-move on naman tayo doon. Pero gusto ko lang i-bring up, no, kasi naalala ko to nung hindi pa nagde-declare si Sara natatakbo siya as vice president when she went to Cebu for a party, pero may side meeting sila ni BBM nun. Siyempre, may buzz na noon. Okay, baka running mates yung dalawang to. Naalala ko, there was so much talk on my timeline about what she was wearing. Kasi parang, I mean, it's fair, like, sure, you can comment on anything you want, right? Pero parang napansin ko lang, parang ang daming comment na, oh my God, parang she's wearing dresses, is she trying to soften her image, etc., etc. And I'm thinking, like, I don't know if men get that same level of scrutiny over what they're wearing.
I don't think
No,
so.
they don't. No,
Yeah.
I
they
mean,
don't.
syempre ngayon may reading na parang, Marcos Jr. is wearing a silhouette that's reminiscent of the martial law era, etc., etc. Pero parang, I don't recall in 2016 people commenting on what Mar Rosas's choice of outfit was. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think people even noticed. I don't think people like kay Duterte parang
You rolled up
running
sleeves.
joke running joke lang, pero hindi siya pinupunan na parang, ano ba
Oo,
naman
more
yan?
parang
Bakit yan yung
informal
suot
kasi
mo?
siya, gano'n.
Diba? Parang,
Oo.
tapos parang naalala ko nung time na yon, people were making comments na parang, oh, it's so fake of Sara to wear a dress. It's so fake of her
Ay,
to
she
wear.
wears dresses naman before. Talaga?
I know, and it's like,
Dati pa naman siya nag-dress.
since when are women not allowed to wear what? Parang, so kung mag-pantsuit siya, yun lang yung acceptable. Parang bawal siya. I don't know, it's just weird to me parang to add to the scrutiny of your capability, of what you say. May factor pang ganun. And then another thing, di ba, parang you have to come out with proper makeup. But you
Yes.
shouldn't be too much. Kasi
Too much.
parang, parang beauty pageant, pasintabi sa mga beauty queen. Parang alam mo yun, parang may ganun. And then, another recent example, obviously, is Leni's heel. Like, I don't know why it was a big deal for people that she removed her heels.
Tingin ko kasi yung society natin dito sa bansa, parang tingin tuloy ng tao may ano ba, parang power play din siya eh. May karapatan silang sabihin kung ano yung dapat suotin ng babae, paano yung buhok, as if that has anything to do with, their capabilities or whatever, they can contribute to the table. For VP Leni, yung kanyang heels, ang sakit-sakit kaya mag-heels. I mean,
Oo nga,
I
guys.
don't, I don't, I mean, guys, for everyone commenting against VP Leni for removing her heels after standing close to 3 hours, try nyo kaya mag-heels kahit 15 minutes, grabe papaltos na yung paa nyo. But, alam mo, it just goes to show na ang taas-taas ng standards ng society natin sa babae. Kasi yung mga bagay na hindi naman papansinin sa lalaki, laging pinapansin sa babae. So, inisip ko din, kung hindi nag-heel si VP Leni nung debate, like naka-flats lang siya, ano yun eh, pupuntiryahin din yun, ano ba yan? Parang
Yeah.
hindi ka naman professional, hindi ka naman nag-power dress kahit papano man lang, right? I mean, I don't know. When I used to cover the House of Representatives before I covered the Senate, yung Senate kasi nag-cover ako doon virtually lang, pero there's always some congressman commenting about my makeup or my hair, and that's their attempt to try to avoid my questions, which they would never do even if I have male colleagues na talagang literally simpleng shirt at maong pants lang yung suot nila sa kongreso. And they never had to deal with those comments because they are men.
Mm.
And that's why women, we always have to work thrice as hard as men. We always have to prove ourselves because that's how unfair the world is now. And so ako, sana yung susunod na pangulo ng Pilipinas naiintindihan na kailangan baguhin yung kultura na yun kasi hindi siya maganda eh. It seeps into our everyday life so much that sometimes we forget we're also being misogynist against ourselves, which is really the biggest tragedy because I do that to myself sometimes as well.
Just to clarify lang not to say that clothing has no meaning. Like clothing absolutely has meaning, 'di ba? Campaign color
Yes.
pa lang. Si Isko Moreno, 'di ba, choosing to come out in long sleeve barongs. Like that's sending a message, right? You're portraying
Yeah,
yourself as really.
presidential ganon.
But like I'm talking lang about the feedback ng mga tao na parang bakit parang ninitpick natin? Bakit ano to? Hindi mo to fashion show. Or parang it's okay to appreciate outfits, I suppose, but it's just so weird to me, that you would hear people saying, ano ba naman yan? Bakit siya nagtitress? Parang, she wants to. I don't know.
Maganda yung dress. Bakit ba?
Right.
Gusto niya
It's
mag-dress
it's very strange. It's a very strange phenomenon, I think. And even sorry, just to extend, no, kahit sa sauna, kunwari, diba? And I was guilty of this when I was a cub reporter. Parang, what are you wearing, ma'am? Tapos parang na-realize ko, pakialam, I mean,
Yeah.
parang bakit, parang na-fetishize almost, or parang, diba, parang what the women wear. The men, not so much. Like, they can wear a barong for all I care.
Unless sobrang weird ng barong mo, like House Speaker Pandalin Alvarez.
Yeah.
At one
Yeah,
point, I
well,
heard the comments
yeah.
about the strange barong,
that-
but whatever.
At that point, I think he was aiming to have comments about his outfit. So, iba naman yun. Iba din yun sorry, dagdag ko lang din. Parang at the end of the day, parang, I think Rappler has a study on this, di ba, na yung attacks online are also very gendered. Like,
Yeah, very sexualized.
Iba yung atake sa babae online. And this isn't just something that Rappler discovered. Like, I believe there was a study in the US naman concerning sports reporters na babae, na very gendered din at iba yung atake sa babaeng sports journalist compared sa lalaking sports journalist. Like, you have, may halo ng rape threats, di ba? Parang may halo ng kung ano-anong mga gendered na mga atake. So parang, it's certainly not unique to us, but I think it's a little more, nararamdaman mo siya especially during the elections nga. There are super different standards sometimes for the male and for the women and men running for office.
Naalala ko din in the Duterte admin when Duterte commented on how short VP Leni's skirt was in one cabinet meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Parang para sa akin as a
Terrible.
woman covering him, like, how can you even like say that on national TV, as
Right.
president, na in a
And
room
people
full of
thought it was
men.
funny, no?
Yeah. And I remember even si VP Leni tried to kind of not make a big deal out of it because parang she didn't also want to ruffle feathers at the time. But
Yeah.
really, it was such a low thing to say, diba, na for Duterte to say that. And talagang, that's why medyo parang a lot of us also really want VP Leni to be that politician who will fight that misogyny. Kasi who else will, right? Who else will na so close to the top of it? And speaking nga lang din of women's issues, gusto ko lang din i-highlight yung candidacy ni Samira Guto kasi she's like a woman also in the Muslim minority, right? So she's fighting more than one double standard. And I really remember when I interviewed her for Rappler Talk, when she was talking about yung refugee law niya, she was saying that things like water, sanitation in a refugee camp, mas kailangan ng mothers, women, and children because women have menstruation. And in the refugee camps, right, in the evacuation camps, kung walang tubig,
Correct.
it's doubly hard for women with menstruation. So talagang totoo yun na the little things that men will never think of, right? Even downplay, like menstruation, who cares about menstruation? But women candidates, right there making policies would have the power to address those issues that really are so foundational to women and their quality of life.
Yeah. Hindi nila iisipin yun.
Yun na nga, diba? Parang marami yung tao na parang don't even think of that when, like menstruation is such a, diba, like reproductive health, pero hindi naman pinag-uusapan yung mga ganun. So, yeah, we
Parang
should
hindi siya
definitely
priority. Yes.
or hindi rin siya, really, it's out of their minds almost.
Hindi nag-occur sa kanila. Literally can't
Until a
relate,
woman
so.
points it out. That's why we need
Yeah.
that's why we need women at the table. Kasi men will never think of it. right? Because they never go through it
Absolutely.
every day.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Okay, so hopefully itong discussion natin, baka hopefully may nakinig na mga tao na, like, fighting their own misogyny. Like even us, diba, we all are also fighting our own internalized misogyny. And we really hope that this Women's Month, you don't forget that there is such a phenomenon, and that these elections, diba, we think also of women's rights and what really how we perceive women and how this affects our politics. So maraming salamat sa mga nakinig today, and see you in the next episode of Campaign Convos. Goodbye.